I want to cut right to the chase, which is, did the media force the administration's hand on this matter?
No question about it, Tom. It's extremely frustrating to White House officials, and it's actually unnerving to some Defense Department and intelligence community officials that I've spoken to. From the White House perspective, look, you mentioned when did this actually happen. There's no firm date on it, but I'm told it's months, not weeks ago, when this actually occurred. There were, as they've stated, there are multiple other U.S. hostages they believe that are on the ground there. There is almost certainly planning for a second operation or some type of follow-up operation going on. There is major concern inside the administration, and I think vocalized concern that you've seen in a lot of news reports from the Defense Department, that any operation that they might be planning to go after those remaining U.S. hostages is now in big trouble because of these news reports.
When we look at the caliphate and a caliphate without borders, does the administration look at the Islamic State is in Syria, in Iraq, or is it all one together geographically?
Right now, they're not willing to grant that it is actually a caliphate or that it is actually a state. You'll notice, Tom, that they only refer to it as ISIL. They will never call it the Islamic State. That's a little bit of they've just gotten used to ISIL, but it's also a rhetorical move on their part. They don't want to give it that credit. What's interesting about this operation coming to light, what's interesting about the assumption within the U.S. intelligence community that the execution of James Foley actually occurred in Syria is, up to this point, the 80-plus airstrikes that have occurred, they have been resigned to only being in Iraq. They have never expanded to Syria. Now we know U.S. troops have been on the ground in Syria. Now we know a U.S. citizen has been murdered in Syria. There are a lot of calls from both parties to expand those airstrikes to Syria. That pressure is going to continue to grow, Tom.
Phil, I want to ask a question that may strike some as awkward or uncomfortable, and that is, as Secretary Kerry tries to work behind the scenes, has there been any discussion of ransoms paid or anything like that?
Adam, it's really interesting you bring this up. I think the administration has become frustrated, and I think you've heard from families of hostages that have been frustrated on the other side of this. The U.S. and the U.K. are really the only two countries that don't pay ransom. Now, there's negotiations that often occur, but they will not pay ransom. What you've seen with the Islamic State, what you've seen with these militants in Syria, is they've made a lot of money over the last 12 to 16 months off European countries that do pay for hostages. The concern right now within the U.S. government is basically the U.S. is faced with the idea that European hostages are being released because people are paying for ransom. Now the Islamic State comes to the U.S. and says, well, obviously you're going to do the same thing. Pay us money to continue to fund our operations. That's not U.S. policy. The U.S. says no, and U.S. hostages are in infinitely more danger because of that. There's a really big problem, I think, both on the country side with the policy, but also these journalists. The vast majority of them are freelancers. They don't have large media organizations that have either insurance policies or the ability to go in and negotiate on their own. So these guys are really left by themselves out there.